Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into the core philosophies of a seriously fascinating 2008 lecture all about redefining success, wealth, and ambition. If you've ever felt, kind of conflicted about wanting to be successful, or if you've just wondered about the deeper mechanics behind massive achievement, well, you're in the right place. We're going to give you a lot to chew on today.
So, our main source material today is this text, Prosperity Thinking. And let me tell you, it does not shy away from bold claims. It literally lays out what it calls the law for attracting infinite wealth, and even claims this exact mindset can change an entire nation's future. It's a huge vision, so let's break down its foundational arguments step by step.
To make sense of all this, we'll run through four main pillars today: affirming wealth, money is time, conquering fear, and finally, great ambition. All right, let's dive into Section 1, affirming wealth and prosperity thinking. Right off the bat, the source aggressively challenges that traditional guilt so many of us feel about financial success. It basically outlines this stark clash of ideologies. On one side, you've got a guilt-driven view of wealth. The author frames this as being rooted in left-wing thought, arguing that it essentially demonizes successful people. Now, to be clear, we're not here to take political sides, just to unpack the argument. But on the flip side is the prosperity view. This is the core assertion that money, when it's used to make people happy, is a fundamental good. In this framework, actually affirming wealth is step one to creating wider happiness in society.
Moving right along to Section 2, money is time.
This brings us to a pretty massive paradigm shift. We've all heard the old saying, time is money, right? Well, the author completely flips that on its head, using this mantra, money is time. It sounds super simple, but the implications for how you live and work are actually huge. Here's what they mean. By saying money is time, the source is arguing that wealth is essentially a tool you use to buy hours, days, and years back into your own life. Think about it. When you have financial resources, you don't have to grind away at every single mundane task. You can delegate. You can hire experts. Possessing wealth gives you the freedom to literally buy time, and that in turn empowers you to scale your work and create a much bigger, much more positive impact on the world. You're not just hoarding cash, you are stockpiling time to do greater things.
Okay, Section 3, conquering fear of the unknown.
So how do we actually get there? According to the lecture, there's this really beautiful paradox to success. Step one is actually focusing on the happiness of others, not yourself. Then, step two requires you to fight the fear of the unknown with absolute courage. No self-limitation allowed. The result? Wealth and status aren't things you get by chasing them directly with greedy hands. Instead, they're granted as a natural, almost inevitable byproduct to people who put others first and bravely step into the unknown.
This whole concept really makes you pause, doesn't it? It forces us to ask, what self-imposed limits are holding you back from the unknown right now? The author strongly suggests that it's usually not a lack of resources stopping us. It's actually a lack of courage to step into the dark and just trust that focusing on others will eventually light the way to our own prosperity.
And finally, Section 4, Persuasion and Great Ambition.
Now we step out of our own heads and into the external arena of business. And the source definitely doesn't sugarcoat this part. It frames business success as an all-out war between individuals. But wait, it's not a war fought with malice. It's a battle of ideas and execution. To win this war, you need a very specific arsenal. First up, you've got to cultivate incredibly high persuasive power to get people on board with your vision. Second, that persuasion can't just be a cheap trick. It has to be backed by absolute, unwavering sincerity. And finally, you need a boundless, truly great ambition. Without that massive ambition, you just won't have the fuel to push through the resistance you're bound to face in this arena. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought drawn straight from today's philosophy. We've seen the argument that affirming wealth is a good thing, that money is actually a tool to buy time, and that ultimate success goes to the courageous and the sincere. So, if wealth is merely a tool to buy time for the happiness of others, how big is your ambition? Are you thinking big enough? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to objectively unpack something really fascinating today. We are looking at a framework that originally comes from a lecture given back in September 2010, and it does something you don't see very often. It completely blends spiritual metaphysics with hardcore real-world business strategy.
Whether you're an entrepreneur, a manager, or honestly, just someone looking to optimize your own personal growth, this framework gives us a highly structured and definitely unconventional lens for looking at financial prosperity. We're going to explore the core concepts of attracting infinite wealth, but more importantly, we're going to look at the active, intentional measures required to keep financial ruin far, far away from your life.
Based on the text Prosperity Thinking, we're going to keep a specific image in our minds today: a brilliant, flawless diamond. Why a diamond? Well, in this framework, it's not just an aesthetic choice. It perfectly represents the bright, multifaceted, and incredibly resilient spirit that the author says we all need. It's really about forging a mindset that is totally unbreakable, even under massive pressure. So hold on to that diamond metaphor as we navigate through the rest of these philosophies.
So, here's how we're breaking it down today. We'll start with the enlightenment of wealth, move right into identifying and expelling the poverty god. Then we'll transition into the essence of appreciated wealth, and finally, wrap the whole thing up with how to maintain a bright and positive mind.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, the enlightenment of wealth, or believing in miracles.
You know, usually when we talk about wealth attraction, we're thinking about spreadsheets, minimizing overhead, calculating ROI, right? The usual business grind. But according to this author's framework, mastering the law of wealth attraction is fundamentally categorized as a type of spiritual enlightenment. The text argues that to truly attract wealth, you've got to first reach a realization where you genuinely believe in the miracle of wealth attraction. It is a total paradigm shift. If you're looking at wealth accumulation as this purely mechanical, by-the-numbers process, you're missing the energetic component entirely. The framework insists that this deep-seated belief, this literal enlightenment, is the mandatory first step before any physical wealth can actually manifest in your life.
Moving on to Section 2, expelling the poverty god and identifying the spiritual threat.
Now this is where things get really interesting. The text actually personifies financial failure as a literal spiritual entity. It posits that this god of poverty is a highly destructive force, and get this, it doesn't just limit itself to possessing vulnerable individuals. This negative spiritual entity has massive scale. It can infect entire corporate entities, dragging down company morale and completely tanking profitability. The text even says it can cast a shadow over macroeconomic systems and entire nations. By framing poverty this way, the stakes are elevated instantly. Financial ruin isn't just brushed off as bad luck or bad math, it's portrayed as an active, aggressive spiritual threat that you have to forcefully expel.
So what exactly is this poverty god? Well, this perfectly illustrates the core conflict of the text. The true identity of this entity is described as the culmination of dark spiritual vibrations. Specifically, it mentions the lingering despair of bankrupt or even suicidal managers who completely succumb to failure. These dark vibrations actively seek out matching negative mindsets. But, in stark contrast, we have the countermeasure, respected figures who radiate positive wavelengths and success. The idea is that you are constantly caught between these two frequencies, and you have to actively protect yourself from those dark vibrations of despair.
So how do you actually shield yourself from that? To prevent being possessed by this metaphorical or even literal poverty, the text says you have to be incredibly intentional about your influences. You must correctly choose someone you deeply respect, maybe a successful mentor, a historical figure, or a thriving business leader, and then intentionally tune your personal wavelength to match theirs. Think of your mind like an old-school radio dial. If you tune into fear and failure, you attract the poverty god. It's just that simple. But if you tune into the frequency of those you respect, you align yourself with prosperity.
Let's pivot to Section 3, the essence of appreciated wealth and the practical applications of capital.
This is a really vital pivot in the framework. It takes these heavy spiritual theories and grounds them in intensely practical capitalism. The text emphasizes that the true essence of wealth relies heavily on service and gratitude. It effectively links capitalist success with profound societal contribution. Wealth, in this specific view, is absolutely not about hoarding resources or ruthless extraction. Not at all. It is the natural, physical byproduct of being genuinely useful to a massive number of people and generating widespread appreciation.
To really ground this, the author gives us a perfect case study: Singapore Airlines. Let's trace how this works. It all starts with a specific action: providing unparalleled, excellent service, which of course Singapore Airlines is globally famous for. That action naturally generates a profound result: immense customer gratitude. And it's that gratitude that naturally attracts the outcome, which is wealth accumulation. But the cycle doesn't just stop there. The framework insists on an ultimate purpose: The money gathered through this appreciation must then be reinvested for the greater good of society. It creates this beautiful, continuous, positive feedback loop that the poverty god simply cannot penetrate.
This brings us to our final section, a bright and positive mind and the historical anchors for success.
So how do we maintain this high-frequency wavelength day in and day out? Well, the framework brings together philosophies from both the East and the West to give us a step-by-step navigational guide for our mindset. Step 1 draws on Sonto Kuninomiya, the prominent 19th century Japanese agricultural leader. His philosophy tightly connects the act of diligent studying and moral self-improvement directly with making money and agricultural success. Then Step 2 brings in American author Napoleon Hill. The text advises using Hill's famous positive maxims as a mental compass to navigate through any doubt you might face. By combining Ninomiya's diligent moral study with Hill's relentless positivity, you reach Step 3, cultivating ultimate psychological and spiritual resilience. Ultimately, keeping that god of poverty away requires forging a spirit that embodies 3 exact traits. It needs to be bright, it needs to be positive, and it absolutely must be resilient. Which brings us right back to that diamond we talked about at the very beginning of this explainer. Remember, a diamond is formed under immense, crushing pressure, yet it reflects light brilliantly and is incredibly hard to break. This text argues that your mind has to be the exact same way. When economic downturns hit or business failures are looming, a bright and positive spirit reflects those dark vibrations away, keeping your wealth and your ability to contribute to society completely secure. I want to leave you with one final thought to reflect on today. If prosperity truly comes down to matching the frequency of those who succeed and actively repelling the dark vibrations of despair, you really have to ask yourself, whose wavelength are you tuning your mindset to today? Are you letting in the static of the poverty god, or are you dialing into the brilliance of a diamond? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this framework gives you a powerful and maybe completely new perspective on attracting wealth.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we are diving into a really fascinating philosophical framework, one that's designed to take you from a place of personal stagnation and completely flip the script toward infinite prosperity. In today's explainer, we're going to unpack some core concepts from Ryuho Okawa's teachings, specifically focusing on a pivotal lecture delivered back on October 9, 2011, all about prosperity thinking. We're going to look at how shifting your internal worldview can theoretically alter not just your own life, but the entire trajectory of a nation. So, if you've ever felt like your potential is just sort of capped by the circumstances around you, this is going to be incredibly thought-provoking. Let's get right into it.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the law of attracting prosperity, breaking what's called shrinking thinking, spiritual self-awakening, unleashing infinite power, and then we'll wrap up by looking at Japan as a world model. Okay, part 1, the law of attracting prosperity. Let's set the foundation for this whole framework.
So our source material today centers on Ryuho Okawa's work Prosperity Thinking, and the text proposes a pretty bold premise that understanding certain laws of prosperity actually has the power to fundamentally alter the future of an entire nation. The core idea is that wealth and success, they aren't just random strokes of luck, and they actually aren't purely the result of just grinding away at mechanical labor either. Instead, they're actively attracted by a very specific, limitless type of thinking. The author argues that when you align your thoughts with spiritual abundance, it acts like a giant magnet for real-world prosperity. It really sets the stage for a philosophy where your internal mind directly dictates your external reality. Basically, the invisible world of your thoughts is the primary engine for tangible, material success.
Moving on to part 2, breaking shrinking thinking. Before we can reach all that prosperity, we have to identify exactly what's blocking our path.
The text points to a really pervasive roadblock, calling it the shrinking mindset. And this isn't just about an individual feeling a bit down or having a bad day. It describes a profound state of collective stagnation. We're talking about widespread pessimism, a hyperfocus on limits, and really crucially here, a modern prejudice against spiritual or religious concepts. According to that October 2011 lecture, looking at the world through a purely materialistic lens is inherently limiting. Think about it. If a society believes that physical matter and finite resources are literally all that exist, that society naturally goes on the defensive, right? They adopt a restrictive posture. This shrinking mindset traps people and even entire nations like Japan in a vicious cycle of small-scale thinking, cutting them off completely from true expansive growth.
You can really see the stark contrast between these two worldviews right here.
On the left, that shrinking mindset is hyper-focused on limits. It constantly expects the worst, and it clings to a strictly materialistic view that honestly harbors deep prejudice against the unseen. It's totally a mindset of containment. But then, look at prosperity thinking on the right. It demands a complete 180. It requires an intense focus on infinite potential, unwavering optimism, and deliberately breaking out of those self-imposed boundaries to embrace large-scale thinking. The source material is very clear about this. You can't just casually straddle the line between these two modes of thought. To fully access the boundless potential of prosperity thinking, society has to entirely discard those restrictive, materialistic limitations.
All right, part 3, spiritual self-awakening. So how exactly do we transition from that shrinking mindset over to true prosperity? Let's talk about the tipping point.
Now this is where it gets really fascinating. The framework argues that true awakening doesn't mean you have to abandon the physical world or go live on a mountain somewhere. Instead, it happens the exact moment your self-awareness becomes just slightly more than 50% spiritual. Just 51%. When that internal balance tips, when you start viewing yourself as 51% a spiritual being and 49% a physical or material being, that tiny majority fundamentally alters your entire operational baseline. Crossing that 50% threshold is the absolute critical catalyst. It means that, sure, you still acknowledge and interact with the physical world, but your primary identity, the core of who you actually consider yourself to be, is now anchored in something limitless rather than something finite.
And crossing that 50% threshold theoretically triggers a massive chain reaction. According to the teachings, it completely transforms your worldview from one of scarcity to one of absolute abundance. Because you now recognize that your identity extends way beyond your physical body, the limitations of the physical world just suddenly lose their grip on you. You stop seeing yourself as a finite resource bound by earthly rules, and you start seeing yourself as an entity plugged into limitless possibilities. On a practical level, the text suggests that shedding this finite resource mindset literally eliminates fear and hesitation in your daily life. I mean, when you're no longer terrified of running out of your limited resources, you are completely free to act with bold, unprecedented confidence.
Okay, part 4, unleashing infinite power. Once that internal perspective shifts, how does that translate into actionable potential?
Think of this progression as a blueprint for success. It builds compounding momentum, moving straight from internal change to external, real-world impact. Step 1 is doing the hard work to actively discard that shrinking mindset and societal prejudice we talked about. Clearing the mind then leads to step 2, hitting that vital tipping point and awakening to your spiritual self at greater than 50%. Once those internal victories are locked in, step 3 naturally follows. You unleash a power that was previously just suppressed by doubt and materialism. And finally, step 4. This all culminates in the real world, using that newly unleashed power to advance massive future development. It's this seamless flow from personal, spiritual realization all the way to large-scale societal progress.
Honestly, the core thesis here is just so empowering. By firmly establishing this spiritual identity, the author argues that you can tap into an unlimited power that is already naturally inherent within humanity. And that's a really crucial distinction, right? This isn't about going out and acquiring power from the outside world or learning some secret trick or hoarding resources. It's literally about unlocking what is already there. The text asserts that human beings fundamentally possess this infinite capability by their very nature. It just lies dormant, totally suppressed by that shrinking mindset. It's just waiting for the right perspective, prosperity thinking, to unlock the door and set it free.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Japan as a World Model. We're going to zoom way out now and look at the macro geopolitical vision.
Because this philosophy definitely doesn't stop at personal wealth. It scales all the way up to a grand global mission, with a very specific focus on Japan. The text asserts that Japan actually has a distinct historical mission to overcome its current national crises, and by extension, broader global crises. Why Japan? Well, the text views overcoming Japan's deeply entrenched economic and social stagnation as the ultimate proof of concept for this entire spiritual framework. The goal is for the nation to refuse that stagnation and deliberately carve out a trajectory of continued prosperity. By pulling this off, Japan is meant to present a brand new model to the global community. It would show the world exactly how a nation can thrive when it's guided by these specific spiritual principles, using the teachings of happy science as the central pillar for massive future development and resolving global challenges.
As we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty vital question to chew on. What is actually dictating your daily worldview? Is it the perceived limits of your physical reality, or is it the infinite potential of a spiritually grounded perspective? Because according to this text, your answer to that question doesn't just shape what you do today. It shapes your ultimate prosperity and maybe the very future of the world around you.
Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to impartially unpack the core concepts of a really fascinating philosophy known as prosperity thinking. We'll be looking at its unique and honestly pretty bold perspectives on society, mindset, and wealth creation, drawing everything directly from the source material. Now, this isn't just a basic how-to guide for making money. It's actually a comprehensive framework that attempts to fundamentally reshape how we view history, education, and even our own subconscious minds.
So here is our roadmap for today. First up, the rebirth of history and education. Second, dispelling negative thoughts. Third, affirming good disparity. And finally, wealth creation and prosperity. Let's get right into it. Every single concept we're exploring today comes straight out of this text, Prosperity Thinking. The book makes a massive claim that it actually holds the exact methodology to attract infinite wealth and completely change Japan's future. So, let's break down exactly how it builds that argument. Section 1. The rebirth of history and education.
According to the text, Japanese society has to overcome some very specific historical hurdles if it wants to achieve true prosperity. The author explicitly points out two major roadblocks. First, what the book calls a deeply ingrained nuclear allergy that stems from the Hiroshima atomic bomb damage. The source suggests this historical trauma has essentially created a psychological barrier for the entire nation. And second, it strongly critiques the Yutori, or relaxed, education policy. The argument here is that this relaxed approach was a huge mistake that triggered a massive drop in students' overall academic abilities.
Building on that, the author argues that moving past what they term a masochistic historical view, which is basically a self-deprecating way of looking at the nation's past, is absolutely crucial. Instead of just focusing on national guilt, the philosophy demands a strict pivot toward a proper evaluation, and what that means is actively recognizing and validating Japan's international contributions. The text insists that a nation literally cannot prosper if it spends all its time apologizing for its history.
Moving on to Section 2, Dispelling Negative Thoughts.
Okay, so this philosophy places a massive emphasis on the subconscious mind. The text argues that your subconscious acts like a highly absorbent sponge for pessimistic words and complaints. But it's actually worse than just a sponge. It acts like a magnet. The core argument here is that dwelling on negativity literally attracts misfortune right to you. Basically, if you speak negatively, you are programming your own reality to fail.
So what's the fix? Well, the author posits that because of the subconscious absorption, just trying a little bit isn't going to cut it. You have to build a habit to completely and entirely wipe out these negative thoughts. The text states, completely eliminate the habit of complaining. It's presented as a hard, non-negotiable rule. There is just no way you can attract infinite wealth if your internal monologue is always focused on what's going wrong. It has to be a total mental wipe.
All right, Section 3, affirming good disparity. Now, this brings us to a highly debated topic in modern society. We hear a lot about inequality these days, right? But the text asks a really provocative question. Is all disparity inherently a bad thing?
Well, the source argues no. It introduces this concept defined as good disparity. And to explain this, the author uses a fantastic, totally relatable example, professional baseball. In pro sports, you have this fair, healthy competition that's based purely on skill and effort, and that naturally results in massive salary differences. The text argues that this kind of inequality isn't evil at all. It's just the natural, exciting result of merit and hard work. It's a disparity that we should actually recognize and affirm rather than try to abolish.
So the real test is how you react to this disparity. Think about it. When someone else succeeds and makes way more money than you, what is your immediate emotional response? The text contrasts two reactions here, having jealousy of others' success versus having a heart of blessing. The philosophy states that jealousy is completely toxic to your own wealth. If you hate wealth when you see it in others, you're going to subconsciously repel it from yourself. Because of that, replacing toxic jealousy with a genuine heart of blessing is an absolute prerequisite for your own prosperity.
And finally, Section 4, Wealth Creation and Prosperity.
Here, the author urges readers to take a super common phrase and embrace it as absolute, literal truth. Time is money. We've all heard it a million times, but the text elevates this to a rigid, unbreakable law within this framework. You simply cannot obtain wealth if you subconsciously deny its value or if you waste the time required to generate it. It's all about aligning your conscious actions with this unwavering belief in prosperity.
When looking at the broader economy,
the source demands a total paradigm shift away from zero-sum thinking. It contrasts stealing the pie, fighting over a limited amount of resources, against true wealth creation and generation. The philosophy says we shouldn't be fighting for existing slices. We need to be innovating, working, and believing in a way that bakes an entirely new pie, creating fresh wealth that literally didn't exist before.
All of this leads to the ultimate conclusion of the text. By shedding that self-deprecating historical view, completely eliminating subconscious complaints, and blessing the success of others through fair competition, one reaches a very specific spiritual and economic state. The text instructs the reader to love the God of prosperity. It suggests that prosperity isn't just a bank account balance, but something to be revered, approached, and deeply loved.
So based on this methodology, the path to infinite wealth isn't just about clocking more hours at work. It's a complete rewiring of how you view history, society, and your neighbor's good fortune, which leaves us with the ultimate challenge to ponder. Are you prepared to truly bless the success of others in order to build your own wealth? It's a challenging paradigm shift, for sure. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and we'll catch you next time.